Israel intensifies its ground assault in southern Gaza, forcing hundreds of displaced Palestinian families to make a move again. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Israeli forces are accused of attacking an aid distribution site in Gaza City and a United Nations training center sheltering Palestinians in Khan Younis. The Israeli government says it was not responsible for the strike at the UN center. An estimated 1 million people forced to flee from the heavy fighting have crowded in the city of Rafah near the border with Egypt. Aid workers say there's not enough food, water or medicine, and they're worried about an outbreak of disease. John Gambrell with the Associated Press begins our coverage from Jerusalem.
Today was a violent day in the Gaza Strip, particularly in Gaza City. That's that northern city that Israeli forces first moved into when they launched this ground offensive. In the time since, those forces have moved south. A lot of civilians have left there, but there are still some there living among the rubble and tents. And today, some of them had come out to try to get food that was being handed out by authorities there. Gaza's health ministry as well as survivors say that Israeli forces opened fire on that crowd, killing some 20 people there and wounding over 100. Now, Israel, for its part, hasn't acknowledged this attack. They say they're looking into these reports, but it comes as Israeli forces have tightened their grip in the southern part of the Gaza Strip on Khan Younis, and as they slowly move closer and closer to Rafah on Egypt's border. Now, today, my AP colleagues saw people gathered outside trying to escape after Israeli forces told them to flee a school that they were hiding in. My AP colleague saw a tank with its turret moving back and forth, and as these people fled, the crack of gunfire could be heard overhead, just showing how dangerous it is for Gaza civilians caught between the Israeli forces and the militants still fighting them. Meanwhile, there are continuing diplomatic efforts to try to get a pause or a ceasefire in this fighting. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron was in Qatar today. Qatar and Egypt are key mediators in these talks between Israel and Hamas. The CIA Director Bill Burns is reportedly going to be on his way over to this part of the world to talk to those involved in these negotiations. Now, it remains unclear what any final ceasefire deal will look like. Israel has offered some thoughts. Hamas has offered its own. And so far, we don't see any necessary sign that these talks are moving to a completion, but just with this level of diplomatic activity, with all these foreign officials coming into the region, it does seem like most countries, as well as the United States, which has provided ironclad support to Israel during this war, are starting to push all sides towards a ceasefire. But as of right now, the war continues. I'm John Gambrell with the Associated Press for CGTN in Jerusalem.
For more now on the Israel-Hamas conflict, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Norman, Oklahoma is Joshua Landis. He's the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Here in Washington, D.C., Nabeel Khoury is a former U.S. diplomat and was a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Center's Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East. Also with us, Khalil Jahshan is the executive director of the Arab Center here in Washington, D.C. And Amotz Asa-El is a senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post and a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Amotz, as we just heard, Israeli forces have surrounded the southern Gaza city of Khan Younis. They've also ordered an evacuation of the city, which also has the last two functioning hospitals in Gaza. A UN shelter was hit by tank shells, killing 13 people, wounding 75. And on Thursday, Israel hit a line of Palestinians who were lining up to try and get bread. How does Israel reconcile all of these actions with its stated aim of defeating Hamas as well as freeing its hostages?
Israel is targeting military targets. The tragedy is, besides the very launching of the attack on Israel, the tragedy is that Hamas's very strategy is to wrap its military installations and its military materiel with people, with its own population. It turns them into human shields. And Israel, in its resolve to hit every missile launcher, every tunnel, every armory, and every warrior that belongs to Hamas is at times compelled to find them among the population. To do this is totally legal in terms of the laws of war, and in terms of Israel's situation, it's also inescapable.
Right. But Amotz, doesn't Israel also have a responsibility to avoid targeting civilians, even though they may be among military?
It is not targeting civilians, Anan. It is not targeting them. They're there because someone positions them there. What Israel is targeting are military targets.
Khalil, Jahshan, Palestinians in Khan Younis were ordered to evacuate and move towards Rafah, which is along Gaza's border with Egypt. They were initially ordered by the Israelis to move to the south. Is there any place in Gaza right now where Palestinians can find sanctuary?
Anand, I think what we have to understand, first of all, we're not talking about a continent. We're talking about the Gaza Strip, a piece of land that's 25 by 5 to 6 miles wide, 25 miles long. So we're talking about 365 square miles at best, 500 square kilometers. It's a very, very small area. And the population has already been ordered to move from northern Gaza earlier in the war, 1.93 million displaced. That's 85% of the population moved according to Israeli instructions. That did not save him from the massacres. Thus far, 26,000 dead Palestinians. I would say that most of them are civilians. Israel claims to have killed, sometimes you see numbers between 5 and 9 fighters from Hamas, but the rest are civilians. And you can't hide, as Amotz just did, behind the fact that in a small area like Gaza, Hamas hides behind civilians. Hamas is part and parcel of the civilian population. Where do they go? Hamas leadership is from Khan Younis. That's their hometown. And that's why they are fighting so fiercely, because they have no other place to go to. So the disregard for human life that Israelis keep hiding behind, saying that it's Hamas's fault, it is their fault. They are basically, they have gathered all the population of Gaza as if like you're gathering 85% of the population of the United States in 2 or 3 southern states and then bomb the heck out of them. It's almost like playing an African safari, you know, hunting these people when they have no place to go. And that's why we have 26,000 people dead, 63,000 people injured. This is not because of Hamas. I mean, one could play that argument 10, 20 more years. But the fact of the matter, it's Israeli and American bullets used by Israelis that are killing these people.
All right, let me give Amotz a chance to respond to what you said.
Well, this is a matter of strategy, I'm sorry to say, on Hamas's part, and it's not the only place where this has been deployed. The very idea of hiding among the population is a quest, it's an aim, and it's a very clear result of their policies. Moreover, it's not just in this kind of war situation that their treatment of the population is as appalling as it is. Such it has been throughout their 17 years of rule. They did not care for the population's welfare. They certainly did not care for the people's prosperity. They did not build an economy. All they did was build a war machine, and ultimately it had to be activated. And once activated, it had to be activated as they see things, the way they activate it. It is a matter of purpose, and it is a matter of policy to hide behind civilians and among them.
Due respect,
and then the result is, of course, massive civilian death.
That can accuse others of acquiring weapons and building armaments and hiding behind civilians. Your whole history is very clear to the whole audience. The fact of the matter, there is targeting of civilians here on purpose. And to me, when you look at the definition of terrorism, with all due respect, I mean, look, you're a scholar, you know what you're talking about. There is a definition for terrorism that's acceptable universally. When you use violence against civilian targets for political purposes in order to pressure the leadership to surrender or to move. I'm not talking about the success or failure of Hamas as a leadership. I could care less for that. I'm talking about targeting civilians, and this is just a subterfuge referring to the failure of Hamas.
Yeah, I want to move on. Nabeel Khoury, Israel has said that its goal in Gaza is to defeat Hamas as well as get its hostages back. So far, the only hostages that have been released have been freed through negotiations. These negotiations took place between Hamas and the Israelis that were brokered by the state of Qatar. We understand there are new negotiations taking place right now. We heard that from our reporter at the top of the show. The United States is involved in that as well. Do you think we could see another agreement?
Well, there may well be an agreement for the exchange of hostages, prisoners, etc., but that is a minor detail compared to the horror of the whole war. And with all due respect, someone who works for the media and has access to international media surely has seen the destruction of entire neighborhoods of high-rise residential buildings. There is no way that this destruction was done to find Hamas fighters. I think in the end, in terms of destroying Hamas, Israelis have to be objective and think back to 1982, when the objective was to destroy the PLO, and they went into Lebanon all the way up to Beirut, destroying half of Lebanon, occupying half of Lebanon for 18 years. So they kicked the PLO out and weakened it, and then they deliberately funneled funding and strengthened Hamas. And now they want to destroy Hamas. 75 years of this policy of meeting challenges with the military might that the US basically affords them should be enough to tell them that they will never live in peace unless they recognize the Palestinian right to self-determination, which means they choose their leader. You do not choose it for them. And that you should be able to pull out and pull the siege out and allow them to have a state of their own. Other than that, you will not have peace. And the United States, I'm sorry to say, under the Biden administration, is not acting in the best interests of the US itself.
Joshua Landis, there is another dimension to this conflict, and it's having an impact on the region as a whole. We've seen it now spread beyond Gaza's borders. US and UK forces have renewed their bombing of Houthi targets in Yemen. The Houthis have been hitting civilian ships in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden as well. Do you think that the Houthis' capability to hit these vessels in the Red Sea has been degraded by the bombing by the US and the UK?
I'm sure it has been degraded. There's no doubt about that. But the Houthis say that they're going to continue until aid gets into Gaza. And they're playing the Arab street here. Arabs from one end of the Middle East to the other, of course, are horrified at the damage to the civilians that's going on in Gaza. It's very clear that there's a large-scale vengeance campaign going on, with the universities being blown up when there's no danger from the universities. 350 mines at the major university in Gaza planted with great care in order to destroy every building. This is not a military target. But the war is spreading. And we're seeing today the United States is in the middle of negotiations with Iraq about how to withdraw troops. Now, whether they completely withdraw anytime soon, it's going to weaken a U.S. position in Syria. There's no doubt that U.S. policy of one-sided support for Israel in this terrifying campaign against Gazans is damaging America's foreign policy in the region. It's good for President Biden, I think. The majority of Americans seem to support Israel and continue to support Israel, even though the majority don't favor his actions in the Middle East today. But I think it's good for his campaign, and he's doing it for personal reasons and obviously ideological reasons. He has sided with Israel his entire life, but it's damaging American foreign policy, and most foreign policy analysts are saying that because it's going to force America out of Iraq. It's going to destabilize their position in Syria. Yep. It's hurt international trade and so forth.
Amotz, of course, the Israeli leadership sees this very differently. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he addressed the Knesset on Monday. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
We will strengthen Israel's position as the watchtower of the civilized world in the Middle East. I told the leaders of the world already at the beginning of the year, if Israel does not win, God forbid, you will be next in line. This danger will come to you with near certainty, much faster than you think. I told them, including yesterday, our war is your war, and our victory is your victory.
So, Amotz, what are we to make of the way the Prime Minister frames this conflict, that it is a war to defend Western civilization? He doesn't address the root causes, which have been around for decades, which is the occupation.
No, I don't think that the occupation in this case is what this is about. And I say this as someone who has spent a lifetime struggling against the occupation, the way we Israelis define it. And I have been and remain a staunch and public supporter of the two-state solution. Mm-hmm. This is where I come from. Having said this particular situation in Gaza, we do not face there the PLO, of which Nabeel spoke so warmly. We face their Islamists. We face their jihadism. This is what they say, and this is what they do. And in this regard, Benjamin Netanyahu, who I do not support, and I did not vote for him, in this particular statement, he's certainly right.
Nabeel, what's your response to that?
Like the warmly, that I warmly spoke of the PLO. Warmly or not, that's for me to decide. The fact is that the PLO was the representative of the Palestinians at the time, unquestioned, that it fought for the liberation of Palestine and the Palestinian state. And Yasser Arafat was warmly received by Yitzhak Rabin and other Israeli leaders who wanted to strike a peace deal with him. But in the end, the decision was made to weaken the PLO and essentially set the remnants of the PLO against Hamas. The strategy of Israel all along has been to weaken any form of solid Palestinian leadership and then say, look, we have no one to negotiate with. I think it is time for Israelis to look deep into their soul and decide objectively that this strategy for 75 years has failed and that they need to strike a deal with whoever the Palestinian people choose as their leaders. You make peace with people you don't like, with enemies. You don't make peace with people you love. That's already a given. Yeah. And so I think the Israelis have to get over this problem and stop calling anybody they don't like terrorists when terrorism is very much in the action of their own government.
Khalil, Israel has bulldozed and blown up hundreds of Palestinian homes so that it can create what it calls a buffer zone in Gaza so that militants like Hamas can't get close to the Israeli border. This is effectively Israel moving back into Gaza. That's in addition to the fact, I recognize, that it has maintained a blockade on the borders of the territory for many, many decades. But now that it's creating this buffer, which is going to reduce the size of Gaza, it is not something that the United States support. In fact, the United States has warned Israel about this. But what do you make of this development?
I think it's very important because, frankly, first of all, it reveals Israel's intentions to start with expansion. I mean, this is not surprising at all when you just heard a minute ago Netanyahu speaking to the Knesset. I wish everybody spoke Hebrew to understand that first concept that he presented, considering himself and Israel as being Migdal Hashmirah, which means essentially the guard tower for the West and for civilization. He ain't a guard tower for anybody. He even isn't a guard tower for himself. That's why we have to rescue him. It's our tax money here in the United States that's spending billions of dollars. This war has already exceeded $80 billion. Who's going to pay for that? Not Amotz, not his fellow Israeli citizens. We are American citizens. Today, as a matter of fact, we just signed another giveaway deal of 3 squadrons of fighter jets to Israel that they will never pay for, as always. They'll end up being as a gift to Israel. So this is the mindset that basically produced this concept that the U.S. administration, as supportive as it is, I mean, this is the most supportive president ever since 1948. As a student of this conflict, I've never seen a president that supportive of Israel. He found it compelling to basically say that the U.S., through his Secretary of State, will not support this permanent Israeli buffer zones, because this has always been the strategy. Israel's appetite for Arab land has always been insatiable since 1948.
Joshua Landis, what is America's thinking beyond Gaza, beyond the conflict we see right now? Does it have any credibility left? Can it ever be seen again as an honest broker in trying to resolve this conflict? And of course, it has wider interests in the region as well.
Well, the United States, President Biden says he's for the two-state solution. But I don't think that American presidents are able to push forward with a two-state solution because they're unwilling to put any pressure on Israel, any important pressure, as we're seeing with President Biden now, and rearming Israel, pleading with Israel not to hurt civilians, but it's being ignored. And he's not willing to use pressure because he's focused on his campaign, and that's the most important thing to him now. And he's willing to, sacrifice the Palestinians in many ways and the two-state solution for that. And so I don't think America has much more credibility on the two-state solution. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get any real two-state solution because it would mean displacing many Israelis, and the Knesset won't vote for it. Israelis won't go for it. Unfortunately, America finds itself today in an extremely difficult position because it's ignored the two-state solution. It's allowed the two-state solution to slip from its grasp so many times in the past. And today, there are 700,000 Israeli settlers living in Palestinian land. The vast majority of Palestinian land in the West Bank has been taken over by Israel. So, the notion that it can be given back when 1 out of every 10 Jews, Israelis, live in the West Bank is just, I think, America doesn't know what to do. So it's saying two-state solution, and it has no intention of actually enforcing it.
Right. Amotz, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he's also addressed the Security Council. He talked specifically about the two-state solution. He also called for a ceasefire. Let's listen to a little bit of what he told the Security Council.
Last week's clear and repeated rejection of the two-state solution at the highest level of the Israeli government is unacceptable. And this was despite the strongest appeals from even the friends of Israel, including those sitting around this table. This refusal and the denial of the right to statehood to the Palestinian people would indefinitely prolong a conflict that has become a major threat to global peace and security.
So, Amotz, as you told us a moment ago, you've always been a supporter of the two-state solution. But given the developments that we see right now on the ground, the creation of this buffer in Gaza, and in addition to that, of course, the occupation of the West Bank, as Joshua Landis pointed out, 1 in 7 Israelis live on Palestinian land. I mean, is there any hope for this vaunted two-state solution?
I think there is. And actually, out of this mayhem, we may end up making some progress towards this end, even if it will take many years until it further develops. But in Gaza specifically, the advantage of the situation over there is that in Gaza, there isn't one Israeli settler. And you're making too much of this buffer zone thing. My impression of what I hear is that what is at stake is a military tactic, It's something that can be easily undone in the framework of a deal. And I think that if indeed we are proceeding from here towards some kind of an arrangement whereby an inter-Arab framework, including soldiers and management, including Palestinians, of course, will succeed Hamas as the ruler of Gaza and lead its reconstruction, we can end up with a newly designed, politically newly designed Gaza that can also become an economically redesigned Gaza, a place of peace in terms of its physique and in terms of its location. Gaza is capable of becoming a very prosperous place. It has been such throughout history many times. There's no reason for this to not to return. They have a beautiful coast. They have some very fertile land, and they have some very good people. They're just poorly led.
All right. Khalil, Jahshan, what do you make of those proposals that Amotz just outlined?
Amotz reminded me of Yasser Arafat, you know, when he used to brag about Gaza and the West Bank being the Singapore of the Middle East and repeating the same kind of points. My challenge to Amotz is very simple. I fully understand where he's coming from, and I know his background, and I'm not challenging that. But when was the last time, Amotz, that Israel undid, as you just said, its land acquisition of Arab land anywhere since 1948? Has it ever?
In 2005, Khalil, when we disengaged from Gaza, we just got up and left it. We did exactly what you suggest we do.
Disengaging is not leaving for the land for the owners. Disengaging, I mean, you run away from some
the last settler, to the last soldier, we gave it back to the Palestinians.
Okay, Khalil, I've got...
That's a distortion of history, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Khalil, I've got 20 seconds. Finish what you were saying.
No, that's about it. I mean, like I said earlier, Israel's appetite for Arab land is insatiable. That has been the history of this conflict from 1948 and even before. And what's happening right now, the U.S. government has realized this terminology is not semantics. When the Secretary of State saying no diminution of Gaza's area, he knows what he is talking about because that's what Israel has done before.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's all we have time for. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences,